The envelope was cream-colored, sealed with a strip of clear tape my fiancé had pressed down with his thumb that morning, and it sat in the inside pocket of his suit jacket for 6 hours before anyone else knew it existed. It was light. 2 pages. I had read them both 3 days before the wedding, sitting on the bathroom floor with the door locked and the exhaust fan running so no one could hear me breathing. Those 2 pages contained 7 bank transfers, 3 names I had trusted since college, and 1 instruction from my father that started with the words, "Do not let her marry him." Welcome to Hidden Family Revenge, where we share real stories of family betrayal, quiet strength, and the moment the truth finally comes out. If this one stays with you, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is there. The first time I saw those documents, they were not in an envelope. They were spread across our kitchen table on a Tuesday night in March, 14 months after Marcus proposed. He had proposed in our apartment kitchen, no ring, no dramatic gesture. He was standing at the counter chopping onions for soup, and he turned around with the knife still in his hand and said, "I want to marry you. I want you to pick your own ring because I will get it wrong, and I want you to know that I will always let you choose." I said yes before he put the knife down. I called my parents that evening. My mother cried. My father paused a full 3-count pause, the kind he uses when he is calculating, and then said, "We should meet him properly first." He had met Marcus 4 times already. Gerald Thornton hosted what he called a welcome dinner at the house 2 weeks later. He roasted a pot roast with rosemary and red wine, his signature dish, the one he made when he wanted people to feel the weight of his hospitality. The dining room chandelier cast that golden light he liked, the kind that made everyone look warm and important, and my father sat at the head of the table and asked Marcus questions for 2 hours. Not questions about me, questions about Marcus, his salary, his family, where he saw himself in 5 years, whether he had any debt, whether he had considered the cost of raising children in this economy. Marcus answered every question the way he answered everything, thoroughly, calmly, no flourishes. Like a man completing a form he understood the purpose of. My father did not ask Marcus if he made me happy. Not once. At the end of the evening, Gerald picked up the check for the catering, the wine, the flowers he had ordered for the table. He slid his credit card across the counter with the same easy confidence he brought to every transaction. Then he turned to me and smiled. "Let me take care of the engagement party too," he said. "And whatever you need for the wedding, I want to do this for you, sweetheart." He always smiled when he was buying something. My father had done this before. When I was 24, I dated a high school English teacher named Kevin. Kevin was gentle and deliberate and wore the same corduroy jacket every day, like a uniform he had chosen. My father invited Kevin to play golf, just the 2 of them, a Saturday morning at the municipal course outside town. I thought it was progress. Over 9 holes, Gerald mentioned casually that I had a history of instability, that I had struggled in college, that there had been a period my parents didn't talk about. None of it was true. I had graduated summa cum laude and never missed a class. But Kevin did not know that, because Kevin had known me for 4 months, and my father had known me for 24 years, and the weight of those numbers did what Gerald intended them to do. Kevin left within 6 weeks. He never told me why. I found out 3 years later from his roommate. At 28, I dated a photographer named James. Gerald offered James a once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity, a contact in Seattle who needed a staff photographer for a magazine launch. James took the job. He moved 2,300 miles away. He sent me a text that said, "I think the distance is too much. My father told me, if he left that easily, he wasn't serious about you." I did not see the pattern until I was in graduate school, studying coercive control in family systems. I was reading a case study about a father who systematically isolated his adult daughter from romantic partners by weaponizing his social capital. The daughter was 31. The father was a retired executive. The case study said the daughter described her father as generous, attentive, and impossible to refuse. I closed the textbook. The fluorescent light above me buzzed. There was a coffee stain on page 247 that someone had tried to blot with a napkin. I sat in the library for 40 minutes without moving. I graduated. I opened a small therapy practice. I spent 6 years helping other families name their patterns while keeping my own father at arm's length, close enough to maintain the relationship my mother needed, far enough that he could not reach the parts of my life that mattered. I learned to name what my father did. I just never learned how to stop him from doing it. The engagement was 14 months long, and my father treated every one of those months like a campaign. It started with the budget. Gerald offered to fund the entire wedding $45,000, which he quoted without blinking. I declined. Marcus and I would pay. Gerald insisted, "Let me do this one thing, Thea." He said it the way a man says he will hold the door, as though refusing would be rude. We compromised. Gerald paid for the venue, a stone church with a wide center aisle and pews that seated 200. Marcus and I covered everything else. Then the phone calls began. Gerald started contacting my bridesmaids directly. Not through me, not through my mother. He called Nora Vance first, my closest friend from college, the one who had driven 4 hours to help me move into my first apartment after grad school. Then Shelby Drake. Then Megan Cross. All three were in my wedding party. All three were in various stages of financial difficulty. Nora had $47,000 in student loans and a job that barely covered rent. Shelby had been laid off 6 months earlier and was freelancing for half her previous salary. Megan was in the middle of a divorce that was draining her savings. Gerald offered to cover their bridesmaid expenses, dresses, travel, hotels, incidentals. He was generous and specific and warm. He said, "I just want to make sure Thea's friends can be there for her without worrying about money." All three accepted. Who would not? I noticed the first crack in October, 8 months before the wedding. I asked Nora on the phone if my father had called her recently. She laughed, a short, high sound that did not match the conversation. "He just wanted to make sure the dresses matched," Nora said. My father had never cared about matching dresses in his life. He could not tell the difference between teal and turquoise. He once wore brown shoes with a black suit to a funeral and did not understand why my mother whispered corrections the entire drive home. Drive home. But he had called Nora about dresses, and his voice, I knew, had been on speakerphone, always a little too loud, filling whatever room he was piped into, even when he was not physically in it. My father never called anyone without a reason. He did not believe in casual conversation. The questions started arriving in clusters. Over the next 3 months, October, November, December, my bridesmaids began asking me things that felt slightly misaligned, like furniture that had been moved an inch to the left. Shelby, during a brunch. "Does Marcus get along with your family? Like, really get along?" Megan, on a phone call. "Have you two ever had a serious fight? Just curious." Nora, looking at the floor of my living room. "Do you think your dad will ever really accept him?" Any one of those questions was normal. Wedding anxiety brings out odd conversations. But they arrived in sequence, always within days of Gerald visiting or calling. I started keeping a mental log, not because I had evidence, but because the rhythm was wrong. 3 questions in 1 week, all orbiting the same subject. Then silence. Then Gerald would call me, warm and solicitous, asking if I was doing okay, really okay. Then the questions would start again. In November, Marcus mentioned something offhand over dinner. "Did your dad tell Nora something about my job?" I set down my fork. "Why?" "She sent me an email asking if I was financially stable enough for a family." Family. It was a strange thing to ask a man she has met twice. Marcus was not offended. Marcus processed information the way water finds its level, without drama, with patience. But I could see the question behind his eyes, the one he was too careful to ask yet. "Is your father running an operation?" I sat in my home office that night, staring at the wall. The desk lamp hummed. Its light made a circle on the wall that looked like a spotlight with nobody standing in it. My professional brain was cataloging patterns I had seen 100 times in client sessions: triangulation, information gathering through proxies, loyalty testing. I had published a paper on coercive control in family systems. I had given a conference talk titled, When Protection Becomes Possession. I had sat across from women who described exactly this pattern and helped them see it clearly. And here it was, in my own house, wearing my father's voice, asking my friends to surveil my fiancé. I whispered it to the empty room. He is running a campaign. The worst part was not that he was doing it. The worst part was that he had done it before, and it had worked. By January, my father had expanded his audience. Aunt Carol called me on a Sunday afternoon, her tone careful and deliberate in the way people speak when they are repeating someone else's concern. Your dad mentioned Marcus has quite a bit of debt. Is everything okay, honey? Marcus had no debt. He had paid off his student loans in 2021 and kept a savings account that made my father's monthly spending look reckless. Uncle Ron texted, Just checking in. Dad says you have been distant. Everything good with the wedding? I was not distant. I had dinner with my parents 2 weeks ago. Gerald sat at the head of the table and told a story about Marcus forgetting to bring wine, a story that was technically true and emotionally misleading because Marcus had not known Gerald expected wine, and Gerald had never told him. I recognized the architecture. My father was building a narrative, concerned father worried about daughter's reckless choice. He was seeding it with enough half-truths that anyone who questioned it would sound unreasonable. If I pushed back, I became the daughter who could not handle honest concern. If I stayed silent, the narrative solidified. I told Marcus everything that night. Every phone call, every text, every question from the bridesmaids, every casual mention of his name from my father to my extended family. Marcus listened. He did not interrupt, did not pace, did not raise his voice. When I finished, he opened his laptop. The screen glowed blue in our dark bedroom. Give me your father's full name and any bank accounts you know about, he said. What are you going to do? What I do at work, Marcus said. The keyboard clicked under his fingers, steady, rhythmic, like a man who understood that the truth lived in the numbers, not the story someone told about them. Follow the money. He did not promise me it would be okay. He promised me receipts. Marcus spent 3 weeks digging. He did not hack anything. He did not break any law. He was an auditor. His entire career was built on finding where money went when someone wanted it to go unnoticed. He knew how to read a public record the way a tracker reads footprints. The first clue came from Nora's Instagram. She posted a photo of herself standing next to a new car, a silver sedan, modest but new, with the caption, Fresh Start. She had tagged the dealership. Marcus checked the date against Nora's employment records, which were publicly available through her LinkedIn profile and the state licensing board where she was registered as a counseling intern. Nora's salary did not support a car payment. The second clue came from me. I had asked Nora, casually, for receipts for the bridesmaid expenses, dress fittings, travel costs, because I wanted to reimburse her for anything beyond what Gerald had covered. Nora got flustered. She sent me a partial screenshot of her expense tracking. In the corner of the image, half cut by the crop, was a Venmo notification. The sender's name was visible. G. Thornton. Marcus pulled the thread. It took him 2 more weeks to build the picture, using public transaction records, cross-referencing dates, and one piece of evidence Nora gave him without knowing it, a group text where she mentioned being behind on payments in September, but caught up in October. The same month the Venmo notification appeared. On a Thursday night in February, Marcus laid it out on our kitchen table. His spreadsheet had 3 colors: green for confirmed, yellow for suspected, red for unverified. Nora's column was almost entirely green, $18,000, transferred from Gerald Thornton to Nora Vance over 4 months. Not one lump sum monthly installments, like a salary. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked on Nora's name. I knew Nora had $47,000 in student loans. I knew Gerald would have framed it as help. I knew Nora would have felt grateful at first, then trapped, then unable to explain what she had agreed to do in exchange. I did not cry. I sat very still. Then I asked the only question that mattered. How many more? Marcus did not look away from the screen. I am still looking, but the pattern suggests at least two others. $18,000. That was what my friendship with Nora was worth to my father. I sat at the table and wondered what the others had cost. It took Marcus 10 more days to find the other two. Shelby Drake had received $28,000. She had lost her job 6 months earlier, a layoff from a marketing firm that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with a quarterly budget. Gerald had reached out to her 2 weeks after the layoff. He said he wanted to help her get back on her feet. The first transfer was $3,000. By the time the total reached $28,000, Shelby was sending Gerald weekly reports on my emotional state, my arguments with Marcus, and whether I had mentioned any doubts about the wedding. Megan Cross had received $27,000. She was going through a divorce. Her husband had moved out in August, and by October, Megan was behind on her mortgage. Gerald said he wanted to support Thea's friend during a difficult time. The money came with conditions Megan never put in writing but followed precisely. She asked me probing questions about Marcus's temper, his drinking habits, his relationship with his mother. All of it fabricated concern. Marcus did not have a temper. Marcus drank 2 beers a week. Marcus called his mother every Wednesday evening at 7 and never missed. Total, $73,000. Spread across 11 months. Distributed to 3 women who had been my friends since we shared a dormitory floor. All of it disguised as the kind of generosity that makes a man look noble at church fundraisers and family dinners. Marcus printed everything: bank records, Venmo screenshots, timestamp correlations showing that the bridesmaids' concerned questions to me always arrived within 48 hours of Gerald's payments. 14 pages. He put them in a manila folder and set the folder on the kitchen table between us. I held it. It was thin and light, the kind of thing you could slip into a coat pocket without anyone noticing. I thought about how 30 years of my father's pattern could fit inside something that weighed less than a paperback novel. How the warmth of the pages fresh from the printer felt like the closest thing to an answer I had ever held. $73,000. My father had never spent that much on my education. He had spent it making sure I stayed alone. I went to my office that night. Not to see clients, it was past 8, and the building was empty except for the cleaning crew vacuuming the second floor. I sat in my own chair, the one behind the desk, and stared at the chair across from me. The leather chair where my clients sat. Where they told me about their controlling mothers and their manipulative fathers and their sisters who borrowed money and never paid it back, and their brothers who showed up at Thanksgiving only when they needed something. I had heard 1,000 versions of what was happening to me, and I had helped people see it clearly, and I had written notes in the margins of their files in careful clinical language. Client demonstrates awareness of coercive pattern. Recommend boundary-setting protocol. I thought about canceling the wedding, not because of Marcus, because of Gerald. I did not want my father at my wedding. I did not want to walk down an aisle on his arm and pretend that the man holding my elbow was the man he showed the world. But canceling meant Gerald won. It meant the pattern held. It meant Kevin and James had disappeared for nothing, that my father's system worked exactly the way he designed it, and that the only variable he needed to control was my willingness to trust someone enough to stay. The leather chair creaked. Marcus had come in without me hearing. He sat in the client chair, folded his hands, and waited. I looked at him, this man who spent 3 weeks following money trails because I told him something felt wrong, who printed 14 pages of evidence and set them on the table without anger, without drama, the way he set down everything, with the assumption that the truth, once visible, would do its own work. I have 2 options, I said. I can confront him now, privately, and he will deny everything and turn the family against me. Or I can let him show up on the day he thinks he controls and show everyone who he really is. Marcus tilted his head. The wall clock ticked in the quiet office. There is a 3rd option, he said. He paused. I put it in an envelope. An envelope. He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world, And sitting there in my office with the vacuum humming through the floor and the leather chair still creaking from where Marcus had settled into it, I thought, maybe it was. Marcus's plan was simple in the way that good audits are simple. It relied on the assumption that the numbers would speak for themselves if you put them in front of the right person. We spent that weekend condensing the evidence. 14 pages became 2. Page 1, 7 bank transfers, dates, amounts, recipients. Gerald Thornton to Nora Vance, 4 installments totaling $18,000. Gerald Thornton to Shelby Drake, 6 installments totaling $28,000. Gerald Thornton to Megan Cross, 5 installments totaling $27,000. Each transfer annotated with the date of the corresponding concerned question that followed within 48 hours. The correlation was clinical. Page 2. 1 screenshot. A text message from Gerald to Shelby, dated November 14th, that read, "Keep her away from his family this weekend. I will add another 5. Marcus printed both pages and slid them into a cream-colored envelope. He sealed it with a strip of clear tape, pressing it flat with his thumb the way he pressed everything deliberate, precise, without excess force. "The envelope goes to the officiant," Marcus said. "Not to your father, not to the guests, to Reverend Patterson." Patterson was my father's friend. They had served together on the church board for 12 years. If Patterson read the evidence and reacted, Gerald could not claim the source was biased. He could not say Marcus had fabricated it. He could not say I was being emotional. His own friend, reading his own words, would be the one to decide. I asked the question I had been holding all evening. What if my dad does not do anything at the wedding? What if he just walks me down the aisle and smiles? Marcus looked at me. Then the envelope stays sealed. We never use it. We go on our honeymoon and we figure it out later. And if he does something? Then I hand it to Patterson, and your father explains himself to 200 people who already think he is a saint. I sealed the envelope that night at our kitchen table. I pressed the tape flat with my thumb, the same motion Marcus would repeat on the wedding day when he placed it in his jacket pocket. The same motion that would, 5 months later, change what 200 people believed about the man who raised me. We sealed the envelope on a Tuesday night, 5 months before the wedding. 5 months of knowing what was inside it and pretending we did not. Those 5 months were the longest performance of my life. Wedding planning continued as if the envelope did not exist. Exist. Gerald remained generous and attentive and helpful in the way that word is used when someone is helping themselves to the controls. He paid for flowers, white gardenias, my grandmother's favorite, which he remembered and I had not asked for. He insisted on the photographer he preferred a man from his church who owed Gerald a favor. He arranged the seating chart with himself at the head table, centered, visible from every angle. At the rehearsal dinner, I watched my father work the room. He shook hands with Marcus's family, his mother, June, a retired nurse who had driven 5 hours from the coast, and his brother, who brought his girlfriend and a bottle of whiskey wrapped in newspaper as a wedding gift. Gerald was charming with them, warm. He told June she had raised a fine young man and held her hand an extra beat when he said it. Then he stood for his toast. He held his champagne glass at chest height and spoke about a father's love and the hardest part of being a parent, and how letting go was the greatest act of faith. His voice caught at the right moment, not too much, not too little. I had heard that same catch before. At Kevin's going-away dinner. At James's last visit to the house. It was the sound Gerald made when he was about to remove someone from my life. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table. The envelope was in his jacket pocket. It had been there all evening, resting against his chest, light and flat and patient. At the far end of the table, Nora could not look me in the eye. She dropped her bouquet during the rehearsal walkthrough. Then she dropped it again. The wedding coordinator picked it up and smiled and said, "Nerves." Nora nodded. Her hands were shaking. My father raised his glass and said, "To my daughter and the man she chose." He emphasized chose, like it was a word he disagreed with. The knock came at 11 that night. I was in my hotel room, the bridal suite, which Gerald had upgraded without asking. White duvet, white curtains, white orchids on the nightstand. My wedding dress hung on the closet door, and Marcus's suit hung beside it, the envelope in the inside left pocket, sealed and waiting. Nora stood in the hallway in pajama pants and a college sweatshirt. She was holding a glass of red wine with both hands, and her knuckles were pale. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. Nora sat on the edge of the bed. She did not look at the dress, or the flowers, or me. She looked at the carpet. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about your dad." My heart was beating in my throat, but I kept my voice steady, the voice I use with clients when they are circling something they are afraid to say. Measured, patient. The same temperature as the room. "Take your time," I said. Nora took a drink. Her jaw worked. She set the glass on the nightstand, and a drop of red wine fell onto the white bedspread. Neither of us wiped it. "He has been helping me," Nora said, "financially. But he asks me to—" She stopped, drew a breath. "Thea, I am so sorry." I waited. I had been trained to wait. I had spent 6 years learning that the most important thing a person will tell you arrives in the silence after they think they are done talking. Nora opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then she picked up her wine glass and stood. "Never mind, it is nothing. Pre-wedding nerves." She forced a laugh, the same short, high sound she had made on the phone in October when I asked if Gerald had called her. She left. I locked the door behind her. I already knew everything she had almost said. I had the receipts in a sealed envelope 3 feet from where she had been sitting, hanging in a suit jacket she had not noticed. I picked up my phone and typed one word to Marcus. "Ready." His reply came in 4 seconds. "Always." The wine stain on the bedspread dried slowly. It looked like a comma, as if the sentence Nora had started was still waiting to be finished. I sat in that hotel room with Nora's wine stain drying on the bedspread and the envelope hanging in the closet, and I thought about the 2 men I had loved before Marcus, the ones my father had quietly erased from my life. If you have ever looked back at a relationship that ended and wondered if someone else pulled the strings, tell me in the comments. I think more of us have that story than we admit. The morning came the way May mornings come in small towns, slow, warm, and 72 degrees by 9. I stood in the bridal suite while the makeup artist worked. The mirror showed a woman in white who looked calm and certain. I was calm. I was not certain of anything except what was in the envelope. My mother came in at 10:30, Diane Thornton in a pale blue dress, eyes already red, tissue tucked into her sleeve. She looked at me and pressed her hand against her mouth. "You look so beautiful, sweetheart," she said. She straightened my veil, a small adjustment that did not need making but gave her hands something to do. A knock at the door. My father entered without waiting for a response. He wore an impeccable gray suit, pocket square folded in 3 points, shoes polished to a depth that reflected the overhead lights. He looked at me, and his face did what it always did when he wanted to be seen feeling something. "My little girl," he said. His voice caught. I knew that catch. I had cataloged it the way a birdwatcher catalogs calls, by context, by frequency, by what it preceded. This was the same sound he had made at Kevin's farewell dinner and at James's last visit. It was the sound Gerald Thornton made when he was about to remove something from my life and wanted an audience to think it hurt him too. He offered his arm. "Ready to walk?" I took it. His sleeve was starched. It scratched against my bare skin, a sensation I would remember later, the roughness of something that looked smooth from 3 feet away. "Ready," I said. In the groom's room on the other side of the church, Marcus adjusted his jacket. I learned this later from his brother. Marcus checked the left inside pocket 3 times that morning, not because he was nervous about the because he was the kind of man who checked things 3 times, then documented that he had checked them. The gardenias in my bouquet smelled like my grandmother's garden, the garden Gerald had sold 2 years after she died, without asking anyone in the family whether they wanted to keep it. My father held my arm like he owned it. Marcus held the envelope like he was protecting it. 200 guests, white gardenias on every pew end, a string quartet playing pachelbel so softly it sounded like the building itself was humming. Diane walked ahead and took her seat in the front row. She folded her hands in her lap and did not look back. My father and I stood at the entrance of the aisle. The coordinator nodded. We stepped forward. Gerald walked slowly, deliberately. He smiled at the guests on both sides, his church friends in the third row, his golf partners on the left, Marcus's mother June in the second row, clutching her purse strap with both hands. Gerald was performing. He was giving the audience time to see him, the devoted father, the man who built this moment, the patriarch delivering his daughter to her future. We reached the midpoint of the aisle, the fourth pew, the place where the center aisle widened by 6 inches, and the stone floor changed from gray to a slightly lighter gray, a transition I would not have noticed if my father had not stopped walking directly on top of it. He stopped. The string quartet played 3 more notes before the cellist looked up and trailed off. The violinist followed. Then silence. 200 people turned their heads. Gerald released my arm. He faced the congregation. He squared his shoulders. And he said, in a voice that carried to the back row without effort, because Gerald Thornton had spent his entire life making sure his voice carried, "I cannot give her away in good conscience." The sound that followed was not gasps. It was smaller than that, a collective intake of breath, 200 people pulling air through their teeth simultaneously, the sound of a room recalibrating. Diane's hand went to her mouth. Nora's bouquet trembled. Shelby stared at the floor. Gerald turned to Marcus, who stood at the altar beside Reverend Patterson. "You are not the man I want for my daughter," Gerald said. "And I think everyone here deserves to know why." Silence. The candle flames leaned in the draft from the open doors. Marcus did not flinch. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice or step forward or clench his fists. He reached into his left jacket pocket slowly, the way you reach for something you have been carrying for 5 months, and he pulled out the cream-colored envelope. He walked 3 steps toward Patterson and held it out. "Reverend Patterson," Marcus said. His voice was quiet and level. "Before Mr. Thornton continues, I think you should read this." Patterson hesitated. He looked at Gerald. Gerald's smile flickered the smallest crack, the kind only someone who had studied him for 34 years would catch. Patterson took the envelope, opened it, unfolded the 2 pages. His eyes moved across the first page, the bank transfers, the dates, the amounts. Then the second page, the text message. Gerald's own words, in his own phrasing, to a woman he had paid to sabotage his daughter's relationship. Patterson looked up. His face had changed. The kindness was gone. What replaced it was something closer to recognition, the look of a man who has just realized he, too, has been part of someone else's arrangement. "Sir," Patterson said, "you need to step out. Now." My father opened his mouth. For the first time in my life, nothing came out. Gerald recovered the way all narcissists recover, by reaching for the narrative he had prepared. "Tom, what is this?" He stepped toward Patterson, his hand extended for the pages. Patterson pulled them back, holding them against his chest. "Gerald," Patterson said, "did you pay these women to report on your daughter?" The word "pay" landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. I could see the ripples, heads turning toward the bridesmaids section, whispered questions traveling from pew to pew, the slow rotation of 200 faces recalculating the last 14 months. Nora sat down. She did not lower herself gracefully or sink dramatically. She simply sat, as if her legs had made a decision her brain had not approved. Her bouquet fell from her hands and hit the stone floor. I heard the stems crack. Petals scattered across the gray stone like confetti that had arrived at the wrong event. Shelby went pale. Her eyes moved to the exit, measured the distance, and then moved back to the floor. Megan stood perfectly still. She did not sit. She did not run. She stood the way a person stands when they are calculating whether anyone is looking at them specifically. Gerald adjusted. He turned to the congregation, his audience, his congregation, the people he had cultivated for decades. "This is ridiculous," he said. His voice was warm again, modulated, the voice of a reasonable man being tested. "Tom, You know me. I am trying to protect my daughter from a man who is not. I know what you paid, Gerald. Patterson's voice was not warm. It was flat and careful, the voice of a man choosing each word like he was placing tiles. I can read numbers, and I know what you asked them to do. It is written right here, in your own words. He held up the second page, the text message screenshot, and turned it so the front rows could see the header. Gerald pivoted to me. I was still standing where he had left me, halfway down the aisle, alone between two sections of pews that held everyone I had ever known. Thea, he said, tell them this is a misunderstanding. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The room was so quiet I could hear the candle wicks hissing. I am not telling anyone anything, Dad. The documents are doing that. My father did what he always did when evidence appeared. He switched to emotion. The tears came, and I will give him this. They were convincing. They always had been. Gerald Thornton could produce tears the way a stage actor produces them. On cue, at the right volume, with the right tremor in his chin. I did it because I love her, he said to the room. Every dollar was to protect her. You have to understand, a father knows things. A father sees things a daughter cannot see. He was good. Even now, even with Patterson holding the evidence, Gerald was betting that fatherly tears would outweigh bank transfers. And he might have been right. I could see Aunt Carol hesitating, her face caught between the man she had known for 60 years and the numbers she had not yet read. Carol spoke from the fourth pew. Gerald, did you really pay $73,000? Carol, this is not the time. It seems like exactly the time. And then my mother stood. Diane Thornton, 5 feet 4 inches, pale blue dress, tissue still tucked in her sleeve. The woman who had deferred to Gerald at every dinner table, every holiday, every disagreement for 36 years. The woman who had watched 2 of my relationships disappear and told herself her husband was being protective. She stood, and the room went quiet in a different way, not the shocked quiet of the aisle, but the attentive quiet of people who recognized that something unprecedented was happening. Gerald, Diane said, 2 syllables, no tremor. Sit down. He stared at her. In 36 years, Diane had never contradicted Gerald in front of other people. She had whispered corrections in the car. She had closed her eyes during arguments. She had agreed in public and cried in private. But she had never, not once, told him to sit down. Diane walked to where I stood halfway down the aisle, still holding my bouquet of gardenias. She took my arm. Her hand was trembling, but her grip was firm. The opposite of Gerald's, his grip was always steady, and it always felt like a restraint. I will walk you the rest of the way, she said. Gerald stood alone in the center aisle. The seat he had arranged for himself, head table, center, visible from every angle, was empty. The man who had orchestrated every detail of this day, from the gardenias to the photographer to the seating chart, was standing in the one position he had never planned for. Isolated, exposed, and silent. Uncle Ron stood from his pew. He was not a dramatic man. He sold insurance in a town where everyone already had insurance, and his greatest skill was making uncomfortable things feel manageable. Gerald, Ron said, let us step outside. Gerald shook his arm free. This is my daughter's wedding. Gerald. Ron's voice dropped. Now. Gerald looked at the congregation one more time. 200 faces looked back. Not all of them were hostile. Some were confused. Some were sad. Some were still processing. But none of them were on his side. That was the thing about evidence. It did not need everyone to believe it. It just needed everyone to see it. Gerald walked down the aisle he had designed for himself, past the gardenias he had paid for, past the pews he had filled with his community, and out the front doors. The doors were heavy old church doors, solid oak. When they closed behind him, the sound was a thud that settled into the stone floor and stayed there. The room exhaled. Patterson cleared his throat. His hands were still trembling, but his voice was steady when he said, "Shall we continue?" My mother released my arm at the altar. She kissed my cheek, the same gesture she had made at every milestone of my life, delivered now with the full weight of what it had cost her to walk me 20 feet. Marcus reached for my hand. His eyes were wet the first time I had seen that. Not crying, just wet. The way eyes get when a man who has been holding something for 5 months finally sets it down. Patterson performed the ceremony. It was abbreviated, simple, and honest. No grand speeches about destiny, no metaphors about journeys. When he reached the vows, Marcus said his first. "I will never make a decision about your life without you in the room." I laughed. A real laugh, the first one in months. Maybe longer. "That is a very specific vow." I meant it to be. We were married in 12 minutes. The flowers were crooked, the program was wrong, and my father was in the parking lot. It was perfect. The cascade began at 6:14. We were at the reception, a converted barn 2 miles from the church, strung with lights that Marcus's brother had spent the morning hanging. The DJ was playing something slow. I had kicked off my shoes. Marcus was laughing with his mother about the vows. My phone, face down on the table, buzzed 11 times. 6:14 Gerald. Missed call. 6:15 Gerald. Missed call. 6:16 Gerald. Missed call. 6:18 Aunt Carol. Family group chat. Did anyone else know about this? I need someone to explain the $73,000. 6:22. Uncle Ron, same chat. I walked him to his car. He drove away without saying a word. 6:27. Gerald. Voicemail. I did not listen to it that night. I listened 3 days later. It was 47 seconds of silence followed by, "You made your choice, Thea." 6:31 Brian Calloway, Gerald's business partner, direct call to my phone. "Thea, your father just called me. He says you set him up. Is that true?" I answered Brian's call outside the barn, leaning against the wall, the bass from the DJ thumping through the wood behind me. "Brian," I said, "do you want me to forward you the bank records?" A pause. The kind of pause that happens when someone realizes the conversation they expected is not the one they are having. "I think I need to see them." I forwarded the files. At 6:45, Nora found me at the dessert table. Her mascara had run and dried and run again. She held a napkin instead of a wine glass. "I should have told you," she said. "He said he was just worried about you. The first check was $2,000. I thought it was for the dress. By the time it was $18,000, I did not know how to stop." "You could have told me," I said. "I know." We stood there. The song changed. Someone laughed at a table across the room. Nora straightened. "I am giving it back. All of it. I do not know how yet, but I am giving it back." I did not forgive her. Not that night. Forgiveness is not a thing you hand someone at a dessert table between the cake pops and the mini cheesecakes. But I looked at her, and I saw the woman who had driven 4 hours to help me move into my first apartment, and I decided that the story between us was not over yet. By 7, 43 people in my family had read the bank records. My father had stopped calling. The first dance was not the song we had chosen. Marcus and I had picked a folk song, Something Quiet, by a band nobody at the reception had heard of, which was the kind of choice Marcus made, and I loved him for. But the DJ played At Last by Etta James instead, and neither of us corrected him. It was the right song for the wrong reason, a song about waiting, played at a wedding where the waiting had been for something other than love. Marcus held me close. His hand rested on the small of my back, warm through the satin. I could feel his heartbeat through his jacket, steady, the same rhythm it had been all day, through the aisle and the envelope and the 200 silent faces. "Is it supposed to feel like this?" I whispered. "Like winning and losing at the same time?" "You did not lose your father today, Thea. You found out who he is. There is a difference." I thought about Gerald. Not the man at the altar, not the performance, not the tears, not the curated voice catch. I thought about the man who taught me to ride a bicycle on the driveway when I was 6, holding the back of the seat and running alongside me until I did not need him. The man who drove 2 hours to my college when I had the flu and brought chicken soup in a thermos he had owned since before I was born. The man who called every Sunday morning for 12 years, even when we had nothing to say. Those things were real too. But they did not cancel out the other things. Love and control can live in the same house. I knew that professionally I had written it in clinical notes, spoken it in conferences, handed it to clients like a truth they were ready to hold. Now I held it myself, and it was heavier than I had told anyone it would be. Across the room, Diane sat alone at the family table, looking at her phone. She had not called Gerald. She had not texted. The song ended. There was silence before the applause, and in that silence, I decided that the quiet was enough. Gerald's text arrived at 9:47, during the cake cutting. Marcus was holding the knife. I had my hand over his. The photographer, Gerald's photographer, the one from the church who owed Gerald a favor, was angling for the shot. Guests were gathered in a half circle around the table. Someone's child was asking for a bigger piece. My phone buzzed on the table. I ignored it. Then Aunt Carol's phone buzzed. Then Uncle Ron's. Then 3 more, in sequence, like a fuse burning down a wire. I picked up my phone. Family group chat. Gerald's name at the top. Before you all judge me, ask Thea's husband about the restraining order his ex-girlfriend filed against him in 2019. Ask him why he changed jobs 3 times in 2 years. Ask him what I found when I hired someone to look into him. I paid that money to protect my daughter from a man with a history. The room did not see the message, only the family members checking their phones in a ripple that moved from table to table. But I saw Aunt Carol's face change. I saw Uncle Ron frown. I saw Marcus's mother June look at her phone and then look at her son with a question she was too polite to ask in public. My stomach dropped. Not because I believed it. I knew Marcus's history the way I knew his morning routine and his filing system, and the exact number of seconds he waited before answering a question. There was no restraining order. There never had been. But Gerald was not playing to me. He was playing to the 40 family members who had just seen him humiliated and might still want a reason to believe it had been justified. I pulled Marcus aside, showed him the text. His face went still, not angry, not afraid. Still. The way a number is still on a spreadsheet before someone runs the formula. There is no restraining order, he said. There never was. I know, but now 40 people think there might be. Marcus set down the cake knife. His ex-girlfriend's name is Danielle. She is in graduate school in Portland. I will call her in the morning. If there was a restraining order, it is public record. Anyone can look it up. He paused. They will not find one. The frosting was still on my fingers, white and sweet, while I read the text that tasted like something else entirely. My father had lost the room, so he tried to burn the groom. That was the moment I understood. There was no version of this where Gerald Thornton admitted he was wrong. There was only the version where everyone else saw it. Sunday morning, we postponed the honeymoon by 1 day. Marcus called Danielle at 8:15. He put the phone on speaker and set it on the hotel nightstand between us. I listened to a woman I had never met say, in a voice that was equal parts confused and concerned, I never filed a restraining order. Marcus and I dated for 8 months in 2018. We broke up because I got into graduate school in Portland. That is it. Marcus asked if she would be willing to write a statement. She said yes, without hesitating. If someone is saying otherwise, that is defamation, she said. Send me what you need. By noon, Danielle's statement arrived in our email. 3 paragraphs, clear, factual, signed with her full name and the date. I have never filed any legal action against Marcus Hale. We ended our relationship amicably in the fall of 2018. If anyone has claimed otherwise, it is false, and I am prepared to confirm this in any forum necessary. Marcus pulled up the county court records online. He searched his own name across 3 jurisdictions: our county, Danielle's county, and the county where he had lived in 2019 when the alleged order was supposedly filed. 0 results. No restraining order, no filing, no case number. I forwarded Danielle's statement and the court record search to the family group chat. No commentary, no explanation, Just the documents the way Marcus had taught me to communicate when the truth was on your side and the other person was relying on noise. Within an hour, the responses came. Aunt Carol. I am sorry I even considered it. Uncle Ron. Gerald needs help. Real help. June, Marcus's mother, in a private text to me. I raised a good man. I did not need proof. But I am glad you sent it. Shelby sent me a private message that afternoon. I should have told you months ago. I will repay every dollar. I am sorry, Thea. Megan went silent. She unfollowed me on every platform, blocked my number, blocked Marcus, moved to a different state within the month. She never apologized, never explained, never acknowledged what she had done. She had done. I decided, eventually, that her silence was its own kind of confession. 2 out of 3 bridesmaids apologized. The third one disappeared. I decided that was her apology. My mother called on Monday morning. There was a long silence before either of us spoke, the kind of silence that has weight and texture, the kind that sounds different from a dropped call or a muted phone. This was the silence of a woman deciding how much of the truth she was ready to say out loud. I knew about Kevin, Diane said. I closed my eyes. Not the details, she continued, but I knew your father did something. He came home from the golf course that day with a particular energy, satisfied and careful, the way he gets when he has arranged something. A week later, Kevin stopped calling. Your father said, he was never serious about you. And I told myself he was being protective. Mom, I am not asking you to forgive me. I am telling you what I knew, so you do not spend years wondering. She told me the rest. Gerald had visited Kevin's principal, told him Kevin was inappropriately involved with a former student. A lie so specific it sounded credible, because Gerald understood that the most dangerous lies are the ones with enough structure to survive a first question. Kevin's principal mentioned it to the superintendent. Kevin resigned to avoid an investigation that would have found nothing. He never told me why. Gerald never told me what he had done. The hotel phone cord, a landline, old-fashioned, the kind with a spiral that stretches, was twisted around my finger. My mother used to twist the kitchen phone cord the same way when she talked to her own mother. I realized I was sitting exactly the way she sat. Legs crossed, one hand holding the phone, the other hand busy with something that did not need holding. I am moving to Carol's for a while, Diane said. I need to think. Do you need help? My mother paused. When she spoke again, her voice had the dry quality I had always thought was mine, the humor that survives difficult things by refusing to take itself too seriously. I think I need to do this the way you do things, sweetheart. One step at a time. No one else's hand on my arm. Aunt Carol called me that Tuesday. Her voice was different from my mother's, less careful, more direct. Carol had always been the family member who said the thing other people were thinking. She ran a small bookshop in the next town over and had the particular confidence of a woman who had spent 40 years recommending books to strangers. There is something I should have told you years ago, Carol said. I sat down on the hotel bed. Marcus was in the shower. I could hear the water running through the wall. Carol told me about 1993. She had been engaged to a man named David, a civil engineer she had met at a community planning meeting. David was kind, steady, and entirely wrong by Gerald's standards, which meant he was not wealthy enough and not impressed enough by Gerald's position at the bank. Gerald invited David to lunch. Over sandwiches at a diner Gerald would never normally eat at, he told David that Carol had a drinking problem, that she had been through treatment twice, that the family was managing it quietly. None of it was true. Carol had never had more than 2 glasses of wine in her life. She did not even like wine. She drank iced tea at Christmas and ginger ale at New Year's. David called off the engagement 3 weeks later. He told Carol he needed to focus on his career. He never mentioned Gerald or the lunch or the lie. Carol married someone else 2 years later, a man Gerald approved of, a man Gerald had introduced her to at a church event. I only found out 5 years ago, Carol said. David tracked me down at a class reunion. He said, "Your brother told me you were an alcoholic." I have never had a drinking problem. I have never been in treatment. Your father made it up. Why did you not say anything? I asked. Because by then, Gerald had become the family patriarch. Everyone depended on him. I was afraid no one would believe me. They believe you now. Carol was quiet for a moment. Because your fiancé kept receipts. David and I only had his word against Gerald's. You had bank records. I looked at the framed photo on the hotel nightstand, a family portrait from 5 years ago. Gerald in the center, one arm around me, one arm around Carol. Everyone smiling. The patriarch, the conductor. The man who arranged the people around him like furniture and called it love. My father had not started with me. He had started with his own sister. And he had been doing it for 30 years. Gerald came to our door on Wednesday. Marcus and I had driven home that morning. The apartment smelled like the coffee Marcus had set on a timer before the wedding weekend, stale now, 3 days old, but the smell was ours, and I was grateful for it. The doorbell rang at 4 in the afternoon. I looked through the peephole and saw my father standing on the porch. He was thinner, unshaven for what looked like 2 days, which for Gerald Thornton was the equivalent of a public collapse. He wore a polo shirt instead of his usual button-down. The armor was off. His hands were at his sides, not in his pockets, not folded, just hanging there, like he had forgotten what to do with them. I opened the front door but kept the screen door closed. The mesh was thin enough to see through and solid enough to stop a hand. Gerald's cologne came through the screen, the same cologne he had worn since I was 6 years old, the one that smelled like sandalwood, and something sharper underneath that I had never identified. "Can we talk?" he said. I stood in the doorway. "Everything I did was because I love you," Gerald said. "You have to understand that." I looked at him through the screen. The mesh divided his face into a grid of tiny squares. He looked older. He looked like a man who had been told to leave a room full of people who used to admire him, and who was still trying to understand how admiration could disappear in the time it took to read 2 pages. "Dad, I understand it perfectly," I said. "I study it for a living. You equate control with love. You always have. You destroyed Aunt Carol's engagement in 1993, the same way you tried to destroy mine." His face changed. He did not know I knew about Carol. "That is, Carol is exaggerating. David told her. 5 years ago." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "And now I am telling you. I know about Kevin. I know about James. I know about the $73,000. And I know about the text you sent Saturday night, the restraining order that does not exist. Thea, please. I love you, Dad." My voice was steady. The worst part was that the words were true. That is the worst part. I love you and I cannot let you near my life anymore. Those 2 things are both true. I closed the door, locked it, walked to the kitchen. Marcus was making coffee fresh this time. He poured me a cup without asking. 2 sugars? No cream. My father stood on the porch for 7 minutes. I know because Marcus timed it. Then the sound of his car door. Then the engine. Then nothing. 3 months later, the season changed. Summer turned to fall the way it does in small towns, slowly at first. Then all at once, when the maples along Main Street decided they were done pretending to be green, I drove past the church on my way to work every morning. The gardenias were gone. The garden boxes held mums now, orange and burgundy, the colors of a different kind of beginning. Nora had repaid $6,400 of her $18,000. She sent a check each month, sometimes $300, sometimes $500, whatever her new job as a licensed social worker allowed. She included a card with each check, not asking for forgiveness, not explaining. Just a card with a few sentences, what she was reading, how her dog was doing, whether she had planted the tomatoes she always talked about planting. The cards were her version of showing up consistently, and I read each one. Shelby repaid in full. Her parents helped. They had learned what Gerald's generosity had purchased, and they wrote Shelby a check and told her to make it right. Shelby called me once, in September. "I should have chosen you," she said. "I chose the money. I will not make that mistake again." We talked for 12 minutes. Then she said goodbye, and I let her go. Megan remained silent. She moved to a different state. I heard through mutual friends that she was telling people I had exaggerated. I did not respond. Some people carry their debts differently. Diane filed for legal separation. She was living in Carol's guest room, seeing a therapist for the first time at 60 years old. She told me on the phone, "I am not brave, Thea. I am late." I told her late was fine. Late still counted. Gerald's community standing shifted in the way that small-town standings shift, not with a dramatic fall, but with a slow reorientation, like a compass needle settling after a disturbance. He was not expelled from the church. Patterson did not make the evidence public beyond the wedding, but 200 guests talked. And the story, as stories do in towns where everyone shares a grocery store and a post office, spread organically. Gerald resigned from the church board in August. His golf partners played without him now, not out of cruelty, but out of the particular discomfort that comes from knowing too much about someone you used to respect. The September light came through my office window, the same office where I had sat 8 months ago, staring at the client chair, deciding what to do about the man who raised me. Now there was a framed wedding photo on the desk, slightly crooked. I had not straightened it. I liked it that way. A new client sat in the leather chair on a Tuesday afternoon. She was 28. Her hair was pulled back, and she held her purse in her lap the way people hold things when they are not sure yet whether to stay. She had called my office the week before and said she was having trouble with her family and could not be more specific on the phone. She was more specific in person. "My father will not let me date anyone he does not approve of," she said. "He says it is because he loves me. He says he can see things I cannot see. He says he is protecting me." I leaned forward in my chair a fraction more than usual, a shift that would have been invisible to anyone watching, but that the client would have felt without knowing she felt it. The leather creaked, the same creak it had made when Marcus sat there and said, "There is a third option. When your father says he loves you and then controls who you spend time with," I said. "What do you call that?" The client paused. She looked at the window, then at the floor, then at me. "Protection?" she said. It came out like a question. "And what does it feel like?" Her eyes filled. She did not cry, not yet, but her face changed the way faces change when a word arrives that has been missing. "Like a locked door with a bow on it," she said. I wrote it down. Not because I would use her exact words, I never did that. But I wrote the image, because it was better than anything I had found in a textbook or a case study or a conference paper. A locked door with a bow on it. That was what Gerald's love had been. Perfectly wrapped, beautifully presented, and impossible to open from the inside. I closed my notebook and looked at the woman across from me. She was 28. I was 34. Between us was 6 years and one envelope, and a wedding that almost did not happen, and a father who loved the way a lock loves a door completely, permanently, and without ever asking if the door wanted to be closed. "Let us start from the beginning," I said. "October, my 35th birthday. Marcus made breakfast, scrambled eggs, burnt toast, orange juice. It had started as an accident on our first morning together, 3 years ago. He had burned the toast and looked at me with the expression of a man who had just realized his greatest domestic skill was reading spreadsheets, and I had taken a bite and said, "I will keep you anyway." Now it was tradition. The toast was always a little too dark. The eggs were always a little too soft. The orange juice was always from concentrate because Marcus believed fresh squeezed was a scam perpetuated by people with more counter space. A card arrived in the mail. Gerald's handwriting, no return address. I opened it at the kitchen counter. Inside, in blue ink, the same careful penmanship he had used on every birthday card since I was old enough to read, "Happy birthday, Thea. I still think about the day you were born. Love, Dad." No apology, no acknowledgement, no mention of the wedding or the envelope or the $73,000 or the 2 pages that had changed what 200 people believed about him. Just the word love, sitting there the way it always had, heavy, complicated, and not quite enough. I set the card on the kitchen counter. I did not throw it away. I did not put it on the fridge. Marcus looked at me over his coffee. What do you want to do with it? Nothing, I said. I want to eat my burnt toast. I sat down. The sun came through the kitchen window, and the room smelled like coffee and slightly charred bread, and the gardenias I had planted in a pot by the back door, the same variety from my wedding bouquet, the ones my grandmother used to grow in the garden Gerald sold. The card stayed on the counter. It would sit there for 3 days before I put it in a drawer with the others, the ones from before I knew, and the ones from after. I did not text him back. I did not need to. Some doors stay closed, not because they are locked, but because you finally stopped reaching for the handle. That is my story. 7 bank transfers, 3 friendships tested, 1 envelope that said everything my father could not. If this story reminded you that love without respect is not love, it is leverage, then maybe it is time to look at the doors in your own life and check which ones have bows on them. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.